There we go. All right, welcome everyone. It's Jonathan Lipp here from the Big Apple Film Festival, and we are finally here. Sorry for the delay. So we're talking about comedy writing, and first of all, I want to welcome everyone to our fall festival, which takes place November 13th to the 15th. We're presenting a series of virtual screenings over the course of the weekend. We also have drive-in screenings that are taking place tomorrow, November 14th, and November 15th. The drive-in screenings are taking place at the Demarest Farms Drive-In Theater, which is in Hillsdale, New Jersey. So if anybody happens to be in the New York, New Jersey area, and you would like to attend, you can go to bigapplefilmfestival.com for the full schedule. As I mentioned, all of the films are screened virtually as well, so you can go to bigapplefilmfestival.com and check out the virtual schedule. And of course, we have our conferences, which are taking place over the course of the whole weekend, and this is our very first one. So we're here talking about comedy writing. We have Henry SARWER-FONER and Noel Baker. How you doing today?
Good. We're the guinea pigs.
So, Henry and Noel have a script called Dick 2.0, which was the winner of our screenplay competition in the comedy category. And both Henry and Noel have had quite extensive experience in the world of writing. Both of them have written for television and feature-length scripts, which, as I mentioned, Dick 2.0, which was the winner of our competition. So I'll begin with Henry. If you want to tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and tell us a bit about how you got to where you are today.
I'm a writer-director. As much as I love New York, I'm very happy to be in Canada these days. I started off, I guess, directing sketch comedy, and then also started writing, and I also direct drama as well. I do a lot of pilots in Canada, probably a dozen of them. I particularly enjoy getting in on the ground floor and helping develop shows from the ground up. Working with crews and actors and writers. And Noel and I decided, rather than focusing on some of the more low budget kind of screenplays that we have to limit ourselves to in Canada, we would swing for the fences and write sort of a big Hollywood comedy, if you want to call it that. And Dick 2.0 is the result.
Well said, Henry. My story is well, a little bit different. Like Henry, I've been living in Canada, working in Canada for most of my earning career here. Unlike Henry, I don't direct. I'm a writer. I kind of skip between comedy and sort of wry, funny drama. Co-created a couple of Canadian TV series in the past, and I've written a few features and have done a bunch of script doctoring and things along the way, and write variously for, well, way more television these days than film. So as Henry says, Dick 2.0 was kind of it came out of a conversation, actually, if you want to hear about how it came together. It's very briefly, it's a story about a billionaire who decides to save some money in a divorce that's going to knock his fortune in half and take him off the Forbes list, which is all that he lived for in life. And he takes a kind of extreme measure by discovering that he can have himself cloned and send the clone into his marriage while he lives on in incredible luxury with a bunch of other billionaires. This all started not as a kind of a madcap idea. I'd read this article a number of years ago in the New York Times Magazine, basically about this really rich couple and their divorce, and how the husband went to these insane lengths to hide the money from his wife. So she hired lawyers and detectives and so forth, and discovered that there was this whole web of offshore stuff for the uber wealthy, and that they were hiding their money and not paying taxes and so forth. So and this was rattling around in my head, and Henry and I have been friends and collaborators for some time, and have liked to get together over a few pints and just kick ideas around. This was one of those that grew into a conversation that grew into this project and evolved into the idea of the clone as the extreme measure. And for us, I guess the essence of it is to look at something that some people see as really unjust and maybe unsavory, about, I don't know, income inequality, say. And rather than make some crusading film about that or point a finger at it, just find the funniest stuff we could think of about it and just go for it. So to us, that was essentially how it came together. So
Yeah. And you know, when he sees how much more his wife loves his duplicate, he must battle his better self to win back his better half. So it's also a sort of a character driven.
And reading the log line for you guys. So yeah.
Yeah.
So Henry, you've written for television in Canada and elsewhere, many hours of television. Noel, you also have written for television. But a lot of the work you've done has been more dramatic, like Gangland Undercover, for example, on the History Channel, things like that.
Yep.
How did you go from sort of dramatic writing and make the decision that you maybe wanted to make the transition into the comedy world?
You know, a lot of the drama that I write has an undercurrent of sly humor to it to begin with, so I don't find it really a difficult transition, rather than a kind of shift. You just sort of shift gears. There's slightly different implications for pacing, and you just go a little bit bigger or just take certain ideas a little bit farther. I've always had kind of a facility with snappy dialogue, so it's not, it's a thing that I could do in either place, I think, for drama or comedy. I think Henry might write better zingers than I do. My stuff's like kind of witty. I'm witty. Henry's funny, and I think when we join up together, it really helps kind of steer it into this one comic voice. Really.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you still need great story structure, whether it's a comedy or a drama. You need stakes. It's the same. Storytelling is storytelling. It's just, you know, the perspective on it, what you heighten or don't heighten. And the kind of comedy Noel and I like is kind of darker, drier, more satirical, if you will. We're not into broad or cute comedy particularly. So it's not that much of a difference. And all great dramas have comedy, and all great comedy has drama. You think of, you know, the Blacklist or something, like it still has humor in it, or Ozark sometimes has humor in it, you know.
So I'm going to ask you a question, but in the meantime, if anybody has any questions, they could they can type it into the Q&A box.
Oh, Q&A box.
Yeah, if you have any questions at all, on the bottom, there's a Q&A box. So,
I cannot view or hear this comedy panel. Please advise.
let's see.
Well,
Can you hear it now? Is that a net? I wrote that in the Q&A. You able to hear it okay? All right, if anybody's unable to hear it, you could write that into the Q&A box as well, so we're aware, or write that into the chat box. Okay, well, we have a question here from Ali. Have you ever written for stop motion animation? And if so, does your approach to writing change?
I almost did once. In fact, I had a feature aimed at kind of a youth audience, just below YA and somewhere above tweens. and it had this sort of medieval thing and a female character and a bunch of pigs in it. And I wrote it with a guy for a director who had done a bunch of stop motion animation. We were going to do it as a live action thing, and we had a producer involved named Jessica Levin, who does a lot of stuff for HBO now. And we didn't get the feature off the ground, but we did Aaron Woodley, the director, did a short that was a stop motion animation short from the script. What changed in it? Well, I did, I tweaked it for this, not much. You're still writing beats, you're still writing story, you're still writing characters, you're still, and those characters are motivated, and there's something at stake, whatever you're doing, and that there's whatever the tone happens to be, there's, and if it's comedy, there's comic stakes. I don't really see much of a difference there, except in, I mean, any kind of animation, you won't have any constraints necessarily on you know, taking a rocket ship to the moon and fantasy crazy things happening and coming back and doing whatever all in 2 seconds, where you might not find it easy to carry off in live action. Other than that, it's not that different.
We have a question here. We'll start with Henry on this one. Julio asks, who are your comedy inspirations? Henry, why don't we start with you?
Oh, well, in television, I would say recently Veep would be what I consider to be a superb show, you know, satirical, really funny, but not too over the top. I can also go towards something like, you know, Monty Python back in the day, which is more absurdist, or Larry Sanders, who I think was a real pioneer, you know. The Gary Shandling stuff was fantastic show. I think he deserves a lot of credit for inventing or being one of the first people to popularize mockumentary. Now, as a result, we have stuff, Borat recently. I mean, it's kind of silly, but, you know, makes me laugh out loud. It's funny, you know, sometimes physical comedy or more scatological stuff in the right context, in the right proportions, can be the stuff that makes you laugh out loud the most. Almost like a childlike laugh. But, you know, I don't like that on its own. I like that you know, as a contrast to a more serious story. Let's see, Charlie Kaufman, I love his stuff when it can be very funny. Like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind would be a favorite of mine. Not a ha-ha funny movie, but certainly has a whimsical quality to it. Bridesmaids was a hilarious movie as of late. And there's a lot of stuff that just, a lot of comedy that just doesn't work. It's tough, you know, it's a very small target. So I can't think of a show that's on TV that currently that I find really hilarious. Occasionally a good episode of SNL maybe, or a good sketch, but that can really, that's, you know, very inconsistent.
Noel, how about yourself? Any inspiration from any other comedic shows at the moment, and perhaps anything that maybe even helped to inspire Dick 2.0?
You know, in terms of that, no, not, well, all of a sudden, you know, I should have prepared more because I'm drawing a blank on it. I've got tons of comedy inspirations for sure. I would say one of them, this is like really almost dating yourself or like being a film history geek. Preston Sturgis for me was a touchstone of a lot of the comic inspiration and the tone and the style of things that I'm into. These are movies made in the 1940s, and they're well worth looking up. Sullivan's Travels is a fantastic one, which is about a spoiled Hollywood director who goes out to make an important, significant movie at the height of the Depression. it's just sort of a spoof on rich Hollywood dudes and what's really going on in America. For me, that's the kind of thing that's a real touchstone. In terms of contemporary stuff, there's just tons of it. Lots of Judd Apatow, love it. I watch an insane amount of television, so now, of course, I'm sitting here talking to you. I can't remember a single thing. So, yeah, I have many comedy inspirations. I find life more inspiring. I find Donald Trump hilarious, and American politics I find from a perch outside the U.S. To be kind of funny too, to be honest. But we don't need to go into that. It's
all right. So Mohammed asks a question again for both of you. He says, "Do you ever worry about lampooning something that people can be sensitive about, or do you chase the humor in comedy and then assess it after the fact?"
Very good question.
It's a really good question.
These days, you really have to navigate that stuff so carefully. It's remarkable just in the last 5 years how much that's changed. I mean, I'd say one good rule of thumb is always kick up, at the powers that be, as opposed to kicking down. That's usually a safe bet. If you take the piss out of the status quo, people are less likely to get up in arms.
True, but we come up with stuff that's really wrong sometimes, and then we're both just on the floor laughing, and then we go, we can't do that. And then we go, it's if we're the audience, that's the big laugh. Is it too cruel? Is it too, there's certain things, there are lines you probably shouldn't cross, but on occasion, and not to, on occasion, it's just, there is hilarious wrong stuff. And, I think it's more like worry about it. You worry about it while you're doing it, and then you worry, and then we kind of go, well, let's just worry about it after and see what happens. There's stuff in Dick 2.0 that walks a line as well.
Some readers objected to a couple of scenes. I mean, he said,
"Oh, for sure,
we're going to keep those in." So it's also subjective. Comedy's subjective in the end, and of its time. So our times are changing so quickly; it's hard to keep up.
Right. And Maureen asks a question about the structure of a good comedy TV show. Both of you have had extensive experience writing for television. So Maureen asks, can you talk a bit more about the structure of a good comedy TV show?
I think Henry can talk about certain facets of it. I can tell you from the comedy writing I've done and a show I created, one format that is pretty normal now that we're not necessarily, people aren't necessarily writing for network broadcast sitcom per se as the dominant half-hour model now. It's one of the models out there now, but a lot of the stuff on streamers and other cable, you'll see a half hour where you get about a 10 to 12 minute or page act one, maybe an 8-page act 2 and a 7-page or 6-page act 3. So if that, I don't know if that's the kind of thing that helps you. You take a little longer to set the wheels in motion and set the audience into something. The act breaks and structure are essentially a dramatic structure that works for pacing in a comedy format. And I found it a really effective way to roll, to have that. I'm doing another show right now that's actually a completely different genre, true crime, but and there's a number of act breaks, but basically you go big at the start to set people into the predicament, and then you complicate it, and then you pay it off, basically, and the pace just picks up. You go long, medium, short.
And I would say, as opposed to structure, I would say the thing to be most aware of is the genre of comedy you're going for. It needs to be consistent. Tone is everything, particularly in comedy. It's the most challenging part of the process, but probably the most rewarding if you crack it. I think consistency of tone is what separates the best from the rest. As a director, I'm particularly sensitive to that, and I've learned over the years that, sometimes a joke has a different tone within a piece, even if it's funny unto itself, it weakens the whole piece. In the editing room, you rarely say, gee, I wish we went bigger, And it's funny, as a director, again, when I'm on the floor directing and the whole crew laughs at something, I learned that it's probably a warning flag. It probably means that the actor went a little big, because the crew who are watching it aren't watching it on a monitor. They're standing far away. They probably haven't read the whole script. And so you got to be very careful of going for the cheap gag,
So Jason also asked a question about structuring, but I want to focus more actually on the second part. He says, can you tell us a bit more about how you go about initially structuring your films, or how you begin your respective writing processes? How do you begin, like for Dick 2.0 or for any other projects you've read? How do you begin the process?
I mean, in the case of this collaboration, I love collaborating in comedy, by the way, because I tend to do my dramatic writing solo more, and the comedy stuff, I really like collaborating. It lends itself so well to a conversation. But once we flesh out the idea and then begin to put it down, I mean, there's, we know certain things already after doing this for a long time. The structural kind of templates become second nature to use. So, there's a basic 3-act structure, where the reversals and act breaks are going to come, and what kinds of things you're going to be, in situations you're going to be looking for as you lay out the idea. So I think, in our case, it's just kind of baked in. I think all kinds of things and we've also found things like the Save the Cat template super helpful for keeping a project honest in terms of pacing, in terms of, hitting certain beats and kind of moving things along and telling a good story. That stuff's super helpful.
There's math to it, and you have to make sure the proportions are right. And people have a short attention span and are expecting something to happen at a given point, and that's kind of the fuel you're always playing with, is people's expectations. So, like they all say, you gotta beat it out. You've got to work out your structure. If you start writing, even in comedy, too soon, you're probably going to go back to the structure anyway. Unless you get lucky and it just all falls together, but that's rare.
And you want to, if you use any of those tools, or they're kind of in your mind, they're kind of reasonable guides for helping, like prompts for helping you go, what kinds of things would really move the story at this point? People get really stuck in second acts and flail around and wonder where things are headed. I think in our case, we actually, sometimes we, have a pretty good idea about the end. And you can get to, and if you don't know exactly what the details are, go to the end, start working on that, thinking about its connection to the beginning, and backfill a little bit as well as part of the process. And it's, kind of good to look at it as a whole, and look at how to kind of fill in the beats. And then, I don't know, the rest of it is just having a lot of patience with how your scenes are working, and getting one thing to fit to another, and until you're at a place where you're satisfied that all the parts are moving together and working properly.
Right. So Joe asks, where can we read Dick 2.0 and other Big Apple winning screenplays? For the other screenplays, I will say it's on an individual basis. I mean, you can certainly contact the writers, and if you're interested in reading their script, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to let you take a look at it. But it's for Henry and Noel, Dick 2.0, where can can people read it if they're interested?
Did we hit that button that lets people read it on, what are we on? We're on Coverfly or something like that, Henry?
I don't know. I really don't. We're kind of new to all this. The answer is we don't really know, but we should look into it.
Yeah,
I mean, for us,
never actually used a platform to make a script findable in quite that way. So, well, I don't know. It's on there. If you look for it on Coverfly, you'll probably find it. I just don't know if we've left it readable for.
So we have a question here. You know, I'm sure people on here are emerging screenwriters. So one of the questions is, what was your foot in the door moment that propelled your career and got you the recognition in the film and TV industry? You know, what was that moment when you got to a position where you were able to literally do this for a living?
Henry?
Well, I guess I'd have to go back to directing a kid show. You know, I got to direct a kid show, which had a little bit of comedy in it, and that then led to doing sketch comedy. I was very fortunate.
Sorry, Henry. Yeah,
Go ahead.
I don't know, a million years ago, had written a couple scripts, and one of them got to a Canadian director who's become a very good friend of mine, a guy named Bruce McDonald, and he had an idea and attached to a book about a rock and roll road movie, which he then got me to write the script for, and then it went and won some awards and was this cool. It was called Hardcore Logo. It's you can find it out there somewhere, and it's a very dark comedy about this punk band that goes on a reunion tour in the 90s, and funny and kind of tragic, and weird things happen to them along the way. It's basically just a road trip movie about friendship. That was the one that kind of got me started, and then I've been working steadily without having to resort to day jobs or anything ever since. So, yeah.
I'm going to combine two questions here, Eddie and Christian. So Eddie asks, as a fellow Canadian who often feels boxed in by the limitations of the Canadian film and TV industry, I'm wondering if you've seen more Canadian opportunities for growth and success lately, or if it still feels that having a successful career involved crossing over the border to the US. And then also, just as a part two of that, Christian also asked, why do you think so many successful comedians have come out of Canada?
Well, yeah, it's there's a lot of things that box you in. It's a much smaller market. There are when you write for Canadian, let's say, broadcasters, there's some very different kind of market directives for what you're doing. A lot of Canadian broadcasters will buy American shows and fill their schedules with those, but then they've got Canadian content requirements, which are fairly minimal, but they're just trying to fill some space, and the expectation is the audiences in Canada for Canadian stuff are going to be pretty small. So there's some politics involved in that that's frustrating. It's actually not all very kind of interesting. Anyone can make movies in Canada on shoestring budgets. It's actually not bad to find financing to do that. Finding audiences is another thing. And these days, nobody's finding screens per se in cinemas. There's a distribution model that's for all of this that's being, the change around it is accelerating with COVID. And I think that's true everywhere in the States as well. So, you know, it may well flatten out a lot of opportunity where people are a little less concerned about what country you're doing it in. It's really more about just the financing that you can find. In terms of, but I have many friends who've moved and built good careers in Los Angeles. Yeah, it's a completely different ecosystem. And it's really about building relationships there. I've had friends who've written for Mad Men and for Ozark and all kinds of stuff there. And they have put in a lot of time there and built careers around, you know, they had track records to begin with, but it's really about relationships and being in the right place where those things are happening. There was one other thing about comedians.
Why are comedians funny? I think it's just because we're once removed. You know, we can step back and sort of see what's happening a little more objectively, and therefore satirize it a little more easily.
You had mentioned before a little bit about the inspiration for Dick 2.0. And Jennifer wrote, do you ever write from funny events that happened to you? If so, how do you adjust them to a written platform? And I guess that can be related somewhat to Dick 2.0 because that was sort of inspired from someone you knew. Yeah, what would you say from that? Do you write from funny events that happened to you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in my case, it's like, well, if I start with something like Dick 2.0 and Henry and I are talking, we're filling in the gaps along the way with a lot of stuff from our own lives. Finds it then, I mean, that's the fun of it. That's where you kind of bring yourself to it. There's this thing that happened to me this one time, and is there a home for that experience that you can place into whatever you're working on? And you can do this in work for hire when should you reach the stage where you are hired to adapt things, hired onto a show, hired to write material that you didn't come up with. I find, and I've been doing that for years, and it's always like you're always bringing stuff from your own life into it. I got this pair of squabbling sisters, and we're talking about middle-aged women now who've been a source of pain and inspiration for me for years in terms of what's potentially funny in a sibling rivalry, for example. And they come into lots of my stuff.
I'm trying to jump over to the chat box here a second. There was a question: when writing a comedy film or drama with comedic scenes, does the story come first and jokes and funny scenes written after, or is the comedy kind of threaded in during the conceptual process? So sort of how do you blend the drama and the comedy?
It's kind of all at once. You go back and forth. I mean, the original spark that ignites the idea, you always want to keep in touch with that. That's what motivated you to write the idea in the first place. So with comedy, there's usually some comedic spark at the heart of it. That said, then you have to, you know, batten down and do the story structure, and it's always a back and forth.
I have an acquaintance in LA named Dan Goldberg, who's very well known. He's an older guy now, writer. He co-wrote wrote Meatballs for Ivan Reitman back in the day. He wrote a bunch of stuff. He was an executive producer on The Hangover. So he'd worked with Todd Phillips and things like that. And I was doing this mentoring gig at a place in Toronto called the Canadian Film Centre, which is sort of like our American Film Institute. And Dan came up and did a masterclass with us in comedy writing. And he brought scenes from Meatballs, and he didn't show one single funny scene. It was Bill Murray and the kid in their drama moments. And his whole point was, if it doesn't work as drama, it's not going to work as comedy. And because what this is about is relationships and what's at stake. In some ways the same as drama. And if you can get those things right in your comedy, then you're writing comedy to that situation. You're writing it to what's at stake. And it makes it easier. You're not sitting there kind of thinking of situations or jokes per se. The humor is flowing into, it's funny because this person wants this one thing and this other thing is stopping them, or there's some shenanigans in trying to, someone trying to achieve an objective that is like impossible. So I think that's like, for newer writers, that's really important to think in those terms, in terms of comedy writing, that like be really clear about what's at stake, and it just makes it so much easier to find the funny in that.
There's a question about Dick 2.0. Is there a possibility that it will be optioned into a movie? And if so, what's the process of that occurring? How does that work?
Boy, well, you know, as guys who've been working in Canada, and we actually have Canadian agents, I don't know what it is, Henry. We're just not ambitious enough. We're like, what is it? So now we're these guys that have all this experience, and we're kind of on the outside looking in. So, so the process for optioning this will be either our agents or we hook up with some management or other reps in Los Angeles to help hook us up with whomever might make something like this happen. Often it's like trying to attach a project to talent, which sweetens the pot immediately for going to out for financing or to studios or whatever. So that's probably the route it'll have to take to get there. You know, like back in the last century, it used to seem like you'd hear about writers who have a hot script and their agent would take it out to a bunch of studios all at once. There'd be an auction and suddenly instant millionaire screenwriter. But I don't think you don't hear about that much these days. I think maybe on Done Deal or those kinds of platforms where they track deals and things like that, there's the occasional story like that, but yeah, I don't know. We're just gonna plug away, try and get it into the right hands, and hope for the best, and try not to option it to Canadian producers who will chase their tails on it for 3 years and then it'll die. So yeah.
Okay. So there was a question about outlines. I'll go to Henry. Do you ever start with an outline? And if you do, how much time do you spend outlining before you go to page one?
Whatever it takes. Yes, I absolutely do. You know, you learn the hard way. If you start writing the script too soon, you're just going to be spinning your wheels. It's definitely, it's like watching a building go up, you know, they dig a pit, like a skyscraper. What is it? Like 80% of the time they're digging a hole in the ground. And then once they pour the foundation, the building goes up pretty quick. And then the cladding and all that, all the surface stuff goes up super quick. But most of the time they're digging a hole. That's what writing is. Yeah, you've got to spend the time getting the story right and figuring out what your characters are all about.
Henry and I just, we had a lot of fun doing Dick 2.0, so we decided to write a follow-up, which we've just kind of gotten to a really solid draft on. But in both of these projects, we've been at this long enough also to know, let's just do all the work under the watermark. Let's kick this thing around. And there's a lot of outlining. I think for newer writers, sometimes it is really tempting just to get going. And maybe if you just tell yourself, you know, if that's a process you like, just do it. But at the same time, like learn the characters' voices, have fun with it, play around, do all of those things, but see it more as like a hypothetical document than maybe a finished product. And that at some point, or even while you're doing that, try to work on the outline. And for us, that's the place that we learn the story, the building blocks come together. You don't invest and fall in love with scenes that then later become problems that you don't want to cut, but you have to, that kind of thing. Like you can avoid that kind of writer heartbreak if you put a lot of focus into just the building blocks early and then really start writing once you know where you're going. So anyway, that's sort of.
There was I just have time for just a couple more questions. One of them was, where do you see the direction of, well, the first part of the question was, what do you think is the best way for a writer to break in? Through features, television, or through shorts? And then the second part of the question was, where do you see the world of screenwriting going right now? YouTubing, podcasts, where do you, yeah, those are the two parts of the question.
I'd say a couple of things. And sorry, Henry, I'm kind of hogging it. I did some film school teaching, and there were a lot of shorts that I helped oversee the development of and everything. I worked with a lot of really good writers on all of those, but the beneficiaries of shorts are directors. So as a writer-director, you can break in and do, it's a great sort of calling card place to get yourself noticed and get out there. One of the guys I mentored a number of years ago was a guy named Brad Payton, who went on to direct these big earthquake movies with The Rock. So like, yeah, just like these great big things. And he did it with, on the strength of a little, really cool little goth short called Evelyn, the Cutest Evil Dead Girl or something like that. And the writer on it barely ever launched his career. But Brad it got him into a room at Playtone, and he met Tom Hanks, and everything went from there. When it comes to writing, is really television's where the writer has control more than in features. Television is run by writers, essentially. Television now is, there's so much going on in TV. People are, I don't know, if you're anything like me, I just look at all these sort of apps on my smart TV screen, and it kind of feels like it flattens the difference almost between a really absorbing TV show and a feature. It's all like this content. And I'm often super happy to dig into an 8-hour show that's really well written and crafted and everything. And often I find the writing better than in movies because it's really about these good, deeper dives into story now. Having said that, movies are fun. We're doing this because it's fun. Because we wanted to make a movie. TV, it's a whole other thing to try and launch a TV series. And there's a whole other sort of career trajectory around that and business model for how who works in television and getting movies done. So I don't think we need to get into all that, but.
Henry, let me just wrap this up by asking you, what are your feelings for emerging screenwriters in terms of entering perhaps comedy screenplay competitions and things like that? There's a lot of screenplay competitions that specialize in comedy. You think that's a good move to try to sort of get your work out there?
I'm new to all this, the whole festival thing with Dick 2.0. We've done very well. I mean, we've been fortunate. We've probably won half a dozen, and we're finalists in another half dozen. I mean, yeah, it's nice to have the validation and the feedback. It doesn't hurt. It gets yourself out there, most writers live a lonely life, hold up. So, send it out, get it out there, get some feedback.
It's funny, there's a generational thing. Like, I think people who've come of age and are entering the career and the business in the last 10 years have come into it with a lot of platforms and a lot of social media sites and ways of kind of getting yourself out there and self-promoting that are very different than when we got our acts together back in the day and got agents and stuff like that. And so it doesn't, I'm not like quite as, maybe Henry and I probably aren't quite as digitally native as some people when it comes to these things. I think they're great. I think it's like there are people paying attention to this stuff. And if you're trying to break in and get out there, there's people who are also like young and coming into it in the development end of things, and they're going to read something and go, I read this hilarious script by this newbie or whatever, but they're going to remember that stuff someday, and they may look you up again and go, we're staffing for something. There was a funny writer. What else have they done? I think all this stuff just gets you out there. It's fantastic. I would, if I was just starting out, I'd be all over this stuff.
All right. So in conclusion, if there's any writers here that want to perhaps keep in touch with you or ask you some more questions, is there a way to keep in touch, like a website, social media, email, or something like that for Henry and then Noel?
I know. The ironic answer after all that is, yeah, I don't, I'm on LinkedIn, I think. I don't know about you, Henry. I'm
Yeah, same.
I'm on I'm inactive on Facebook.
Yeah, likewise.
I'm
Yep,
busy.
Facebook. We're real old school when it comes to that.
Busy. I don't know, but so yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, Henry, SARWER-FONER, Noel Baker. Their script is Dick 2.0. Was a winner in the Big Apple Film Festival screenplay category. So hopefully we'll be seeing it in the movies soon. For all of you watching, if you are available in the next hour from noon until about 1, we'll be speaking on story structure. This will be focusing on short films with Michael Pickney, who is a filmmaker and producer who's worked alongside Spike Lee for many years. He was assistant director on films like Inside Man and A Miracle in St. Anne's. He's also assistant director on shows like Broad City, Law and Order. We have Jim Fagan, who's written for Comedy Central, again, referencing comedy, and Ali Keller, who is in the world of theater and playwriting, and also now in the world of film. So, okay, Henry and Noel, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Good luck with 2.0, and good luck to everybody here with your scripts and any other projects you're working on. All right, bye.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
All right, so long. Take care.